Why? Path to form? Right. There's an easier way. There's an easier way to get it consistent while not adding to poly count, really. You can use opacity. So if we want stitching in specific places, select the different edge loops that you want for your stitching. And create a shape. You can go smooth or linear, it depends on your model really. You typically want to, if you have turbo smooth, you want to create it linear so that you select the hard edges, and then when you smooth it, you'll apply a smooth to your stitching as well. So I have my shape. I'm going to go and select my splines here. There's a couple ways you could do this. Some people do rendering. I don't like doing it this way because I've noticed problems with them merging into scenes. So a way to make sure that it's always going to carry over is to do a sweep. Select a cylinder. Depending on the size of your stitching, you're going to want to make this pretty small. You can also adjust the interpolation so that it's not so dense. And the rest is done through materials. So I'm going to assign this basic material to it, and I'm just going to make it, let's do like a white-ish stitching. So we're going for this effect where it appears that it's going in and out, right? So without using geometry, we can just use a simple gradient right in 3ds Max. For opacity, black is invisible and white is visible. So if we think about a basic stitch and what it looks like, we have this middle center will be raised and the outsides will be in the actual cushion. So essentially we're just creating this shape with a gradient. Now, we only care about horizontal tiling in this case. So we can start to raise the tiling for this and it will repeat the stitching over and over again. The vertical tiling really doesn't have any effect because we're not going upward with it in this case. To make this a little bit easier and to make it consistent across everything, I'm going to generate real world coordinates on this sweep. So it creates the map for this spline at a real world scale. That way I can tell it exactly how big I want each stitch.
Trong cái trường hợp này để mà mình có thể control được là mỗi cái vết khâu nó có consistent đồng bộ hay không, và theo cái size nó có thực hay không ở trên cái wall thì mình sẽ chọn trên cái đó thì real wall nó khoảng website và
generate. If you follow these steps, you won't have to do UVs on the spline at all. Now, since I did real world coordinates for my UVs, I need to do it for the gradient as well. Then I'm just going to plug it into the opacity channel. If I zoom in a little bit here, and I view my material in the viewport, we can see what it's going to look like. Now, I don't want my stitches to be 1/4 of an inch in this case because it's a big thing. Maybe I want my stitches to be like 4 inches wide. So I just choose 4 inches and it will create a 4-inch wide stitch. So let's go with 2 for right now and we'll see what it looks like in the render. Now, since I have a very large gradient, we can start to see the transparency between each piece. So we want to adjust this gradient by dragging some extra parts on here. So I'm going to create some more pieces here and I'm going to make my stitching so that it's a little bit further apart from each other. You can easily create, if you haven't used gradient before, you can easily create new points by just clicking anywhere in here and then double clicking to adjust the color. If you need to remove it, simply right click and delete. You cannot remove the end ones. So I'm going to adjust this so that it has a pretty sharp fall off. And that way we don't see like inside the tube like we were earlier. If we're getting really close to this, you can add displacement. And you would just want to adjust the gradient so that it had a smoother transition. So each part would actually come up like an arc. So we would do something like this. And I would also bring in the ends a little bit. I'm going to stop my render for a minute and I'm going to add a displacement modifier. V-ray displacement. It really doesn't add to render time in this case. It's pretty good. The only thing you would need to do is to bury your stitch a little bit into the geometry so that it actually punctures through with displacement. So I just scaled it in this case. It would be a little bit better to have these as separate pieces, but this just works for this demonstration. I'm going to drag this second gradient map into my texture map channel. And let's see what we get. Obviously, that's pretty extreme. All we need to do is select our object again. And adjust how much it's actually displacing. I'm going to adjust my scale just to be 99. And I'm going to lock my camera so I can actually do stuff in my perspective. And now we can play around with how this stitching actually looks. So right now it tapers off a little bit. We can go into our material editor and start to adjust our gradient. Maybe we have like a darker gray where it starts to come in slowly. But then we have a white in the middle where it really starts to pop out and round off. See what it looks like from this side. As I mentioned, it's not entirely necessary to use displacement, but here and there, depending on how small the object is, or you just may come across an instance where you want it to really come out. I don't recommend using it every single time, but use it as necessary. Any questions on that? Can we add it to apply it to what? Oh, I wouldn't recommend using this for nailhead. Only because the ends aren't, you can't get a round look. You actually could with radial, I guess. I wouldn't recommend it. It's not going to look right. This is stitching. It's very small. Nail heads are pretty prominent. So I would still use path to form or any of the other methods that they're using right now.